Welcome to Facing the Moment, brought to you by the Foundation for Self-Leadership. In these episodes, we will address various crises and focus on how to navigate them with abundant fortitude and a bit of hope. As we discuss relevant observations together, we will identify meaningful actions that will generate valuable insights. You can download all episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube.
I welcome our listeners to this episode. Today's conversation is about relieving our straining community from external pressure and helping us all navigate under that stress. How might we keep our community together and still endeavor to strengthen its bond and facilitate a shared journey when the times, like today, are extremely complex and challenging? How might we face the unknown and undue force from the outside and apparent harm-causing decisions and behaviors from systems designed to protect us? How might we deal with the pain and disbelief on the inside? I'm thinking today of what is going on in some U.S. cities, Minneapolis as one most recent example. This is not a political conversation, though. Granted, there are differing views and maybe different interpretations of past actions. And granted, many among us may not be aligned with the reasons that got us here and who is to blame, be that a political party or a government institution, a certain industry sector, or certain individuals. A lot has happened on numerous fronts over the last decade, and to be fair, over centuries in the United States and elsewhere. And we are angrily divided and anxiously struggling to reduce political polarizations, and we continue trying whichever way we can to get unstuck. We will endeavor in this episode to discuss all this while focusing on the human dimension. We will endeavor to make this conversation about salvaging and preserving basic elements of respect, dignity, and belonging, about moral values of caring for one another, seeing one another, being there for folks in need, yet protecting and defending what makes a nation, and we the people, as a creed and a worldview worth aspiring to. To help me unpack all that, I'm grateful and privileged to be joined by Jody Nelson, EdD, LMFT, who has dealt and is currently dealing with that very reality in her hometown of Minneapolis. Thank you for joining me, Jody.
Great. Toufic, I'm honored to be asked by you to join in this conversation about community trauma and community resilience. In every conversation with you, you always elevate my own thinking and reflection. I'm a helper, and like many helpers, I'm more of a doer. But you create opportunities to kind of rise above the noise. I appreciate that. So let's get to it.
Well, thank you. Before we do that, though, I would like to say a few words about you, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Jody Nelson is a trained family therapist. She has been a nonprofit executive and a former university professor. As an effective leader, she is a highly caring human being. She serves as senior advisor to Change Inc., a nonprofit dedicated to creating educational, training, and healing opportunities for children, youth, young adults, and families through the power of relationships and community. Jody helped found the organization, which is now the product of two active merging nonprofits in St. Paul and Minneapolis. The work of Change Inc. is inspiring and touches many lives. It instills hope and is driven by the community building belief that being in community is a critical resource for human development. I met Jody years ago when she gave a plenary at the IFS conference. Jody and her team were the recipient of the foundation's first grant to support a self-leadership inspired program for school educators in historically underprivileged communities. I've always admired Jody's commitment to healing, overall cool and matter-of-fact demeanor, and as listeners may notice, I have to say this, Jody, her gifted sense of humor In times of crisis, maintaining a sense of humor may protect us from despair. Thank you, Jody.
Yeah, that's great. I think that work we did, Toufic, with the schools was some of the most important work I've ever done.
Wonderful to hear. And it really got us on a path as a foundation to do more in that space. So thank you for all that, you and your team. So let's start by setting the overall context then. You've been supporting schools and communities under stress for a very long time. What feels different to you nowadays, and what may appear familiar?
Yeah, so a little context about the agency Change Inc. So we provide school-based mental health in 6 districts in the metro area and over 40 schools. And we also run our own alternative high school with about 140 young people. High numbers of students of color, immigrant, refugee, asylee students, families, and communities, and many of our staff are from those same communities. So that's the context of my work, of our work. The stress of the last 3 months, the particular stress, has been primarily in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, called the Metro Surge, where the Homeland Security has sent in 4,000 ICE agents and Border Control agents to perform mass deportation in our cities and in our state. At the beginning of the surge, and that was beginning in December, I believe, it was commented by people that it felt like the first month of the shutdown during COVID. That same kind of what's going on here? We've never been here before. What do we need to do to protect the vulnerable? The similarity is that we created all sorts of protocols, safety protocols in schools, in office buildings. What are the private spaces? What are the public spaces? So if an ICE agent comes to your building, where might they be able to enter and not enter? Trained everyone, students, teachers, parents in know your rights. There's little red cards that have know your rights on them. Learn what a federal warrant looks like, needs to be signed by a federal judge, all that kinds of stuff that you didn't really get in your education program where you're training to be a therapist program. It was this kind of new information. Schools, that I said after COVID, I never wanted to use the word pivot again. But we were pivoting all over the place, excusing absences for young people who were afraid to come to school. Schools here have closed down for a couple of days while they worked out distance learning again. All of that kind of business, and we know that that's performative learning on one level. Young people have, on one hand, not recovered from the COVID year out, and so here we are again with that disrupted learning, and particularly for young people who need to be in school every day for food and for their learning. To the point now that ICE did not follow the rules. They go anywhere they want to. They've gone into schools, they've gone into churches, they've gone into hospitals. So people figuring out where do we need to put human bodies so that we have eyes on and can witness what's going on. So similar to COVID, all that kind of rapid response work has been done by all of the good people. The difference is that COVID came for all of us. It was equal opportunity illness. What's happening in the Twin Cities is particularly targeting our brown and Black communities. It's particularly targeting, people from, low income, their businesses, all this kind of business. So it's very vulnerable people. I was corrected the other day speaking to an African-American woman. I said something about the Nazis or what have you, and that's a common metaphor. And she said, no, this is the slave patrols. And that just hit me in my gut. That is the metaphor. They're coming for the brown and Black people. And so that's the familiar, and then that's the difference in the crisis that we're facing here in this state.
Thank you for sharing that, and not to add to what you're saying, but clearly they're coming for certain groups, but they're affecting everyone,
right?
As we've noticed as of late, in unacceptable ways, perhaps. Yes. So when pressure on a community rises, where do you see it show up first? I'm thinking individuals. Is it families? Is it institutions? Where does it show up? that pressure?
I would say it showed up originally very individual, very family. It took a minute to say what now? What's happening? Who's targeted? And that family, that kid, that staff person, you're having to figure out who's most vulnerable. I will say though, the amazing story coming out of the Twin Cities is who showed up first, and that is neighbors, and just amazingly so. And I'll just share with you about the Twin Cities. It's a very neighborhood-oriented place, both St. Paul and Minneapolis. All the neighborhoods have names like Phillips, Powderhorn, Frogtown, Dayton's Bluff, East Side, West Side. So you know what neighborhood you live in, as a kid, you know what neighborhood you're from. Um, so there is this sort of cohesion already, the sense of belonging to a place, to a geography. And you add technology to that, and there's Facebook groups, and now I'm on a Signal group for delivering supplies to families that are afraid to leave their homes. I have a Facebook group for my block. We had kids that did a food drive. I know all about it because of Facebook. So there is this just cohesion in the Twin Cities before this crisis. And they say now that neighbor is a verb, that people are neighboring and really coming out for one another. And that's it's made me so proud to be in this place and a part of that. I will also say that we have strong leadership at the Governor Walz, Mayor Fry in Minneapolis, Mayor Herr in St. Paul, Attorney General Keith Ellison. They are just, they're on it. They're communicating. They're leading. That feels good. And then just again, all kinds of everyday people. There's going to be some iconic photos, I think, of this time of they call her the pink coat lady that was taking videos as Alex Preddy was being actually shot and killed by Border Patrol, as well as there was a woman, I think she works for NPR, but went out in her green bathrobe and slippers, being a witness to an ICE action. So just these folks are showing up, and that just gives me, just a lot of hope in the human condition.
Yeah, thank you. I very much like that notion that neighbor is a verb. You may have said that before. It's like love, love is a verb.
Yeah.
Something to think about and try to replicate in other places. But clearly, in your case, it's something that has evolved within the community over time, and it becomes part and parcel of what the community is.
Right.
This neighboring notion and bond. So you've been a Minnesota resident your whole adult life, I recall, and you've given your career and heart to your community. So what is coming up for you lately with all that's going on in your neighborhoods? You personally, Jody Nelson, a mere few years after the tragic killing of George Floyd and what ensued.
Yeah, so I have lived in South Minneapolis actually my whole adult life, almost 50 years. And it's and most of this stuff has happened in South Minneapolis. George Floyd was murdered by Derek Chauvin kneeling on his neck for 9.5 minutes, 10 blocks from my house. I remember walking my dog the next morning, and there was ashes in my neighborhood, and I thought, well, did someone's fireplace blow up, or what's all this ash from? And it was from the 5th precinct burning and Lake Street just erupting, which is about 5 miles away, but it traveled to where I was living. So that's very personal. I think there was a lot of work to, and I'm think as you caused me to think about how people are responding now as compared to how people responded to George Floyd. And I think we see this stuff with our own eyes. We've seen people murdered with our own eyes. In terms of George Floyd, that felt like the last straw. That felt like, there had been so many other murders of Black people by police that in the country that caused that sort of eruption, the rage that we will talk about. that kind of just racial reckoning in the community and then spread throughout. We worked closely with community members. This is similar. The community around the corner, 38th and Chicago, where George Floyd was killed, the community just came out. They shut the street down. That's now George Floyd Square. It was community taking care of community. And so there's some similarities to that, to the protesting and marching, that sort of thing. But there's been a lot of work done in the community since George Floyd by the police department, by the community, a lot of coming together on how are we going to live in this city together. And I think because of that work, this is different. This is, how do we be measured? How do we be strategic? How do we think the long game? How do we not play into what we might be being kind of goaded to do? And again, it's we are going to save us. It is the community is going to save the community. And so that feels like maybe we learned something along the way.
Yeah, I believe you did, clearly. You've interacted and worked with educators, counselors, and parents through Change Inc. and through your other practices. What emotions are they generally carrying these days that may go unseen? If you can go down to their inner system, would like to kind of put this out there for us to understand what happens in these situations on a personal level.
Yeah. I remember, Toufic, when we did the project with the foundation with the middle school teachers for that whole year. That was in 2017-18, and in the winter, I think it was, of 2018 was the Parkland school shooting in Florida. And I had the opportunity to meet with those 16 middle school educators that Saturday and ask them, how is that landing on them? How are they feeling about what parts were coming up for them, given the Parkland shooting? And to a person, they said they felt numb. And I will always remember that. And I thought, well, that is not good for these middle school educators to be numb. How do we work with that, get the protection of that, and work through that and work with that part. And some of that is here today. I was asked a couple of weeks ago to do I did a workshop that I repeated twice for St. Paul Public Schools for their mental health teams. And they'd asked me to do it before all the ice stuff. It was with other kinds of stressors in the fall, and said, could you do it on humor? And I thought, okay. And then as I get ready to have to do this, all this stuff is happening. I thought, how am I going to do humor in this mess? But I did. And what they shared with me was that, and they shared it with the staff of St. Paul, is that they were so grateful to have a moment to laugh, because they couldn't even remember the last time they had laughed. There is a lot of, sort of chaos brain, people feeling very foggy. I kind of can't put two thoughts together, which is that sort of nervous system overload. A lot of sadness, and we know, and then anger, and we know anger is the protector of sadness, but a lot of people talking about just kind of carrying a brick around. I remember a teacher saying that. Some people feel helpless. And what can I do to make a difference here for the kids in my classroom? These are, people who care about kids are very wounded because they can't do what they do, which is care about kids. How do I keep you safe? So I think in general, a sense of overwhelm is what they're carrying.
Yeah, it sounds, it reminds me of also to some extent to how we respond to trauma, how we respond to
Totally.
being forced to do things that violate our own belief system, right? Moral injury, as some folks call it. Yeah. I mean, it's hard to talk about what's going on in Minneapolis and other places in this country around immigration conditions and steer away from politics and not discuss whether or not all illegal immigrants need to be treated as criminals, whether or not there should be a clear path to citizenship for those who have abided by the laws and built productive lives once here in the country. Whether or not we need to detain them and treat them poorly and inhumanely or deport them to places just to make a point and deter future individuals from coming in. Whether or not to build walls, close borders, and show strength and take a punishing stance. Whether or not to play favoritism with certain groups or refugees or immigrants based on race, ethnicity, or economic ability. Yet, we shall try not to discuss any of that specifically. Of course, these are real issues that I'm hoping, civic servants and civic leaders and folks in the know figure out how to address them with respect and care for the greater well-being of this country. But I hope you're okay with us not going in that direction and then leaving all that to someone else and focusing on the human aspects of things.
Toufic, I appreciate you setting that boundary. And of course, you gave me a heads up about that before right now, because I could certainly blow too. I have plenty of conversations where all of my opinions are right out there. But I appreciate the boundary setting. I appreciate the lane. And there are so many conversations going on that people can tap into. There's, social media. I mean, we can curate what we're listening to, obviously. I shared that I often am invited to talk with educators and mental health folks as well. And I do pay attention to, what's going to be useful to people. Again, I'm a helper. And that's what gets me out of bed is, can I help somebody here? And so I hope that leaving some of my big fat opinions to the side so that I can, be clear, have some clarity for folks about, how we're surviving and sometimes even thriving here and how that might be helpful.
Well, thank you. Clearly, I'm not trying to remove the passion from our views and commitments and human focused leanings. Not at all. Just trying to put it in a way that could be heard, right, that could be helpful, like you said, useful to people, right? Regardless of these polarized interpretations or partisan talking points or beliefs, something has gone awry in these cities and in their interaction with the federal government. And it is causing severe pain, rage, fear, and anxiety, and a high, even unbearable cost on human lives and livelihood, literally and figuratively. And that's really what I'm hoping to kind of look at, right? Yep. Because I know that some may be pleased and proud with what they see. I'm not one of them, and nor are you and many of our listeners. Right. People feel watched, intruded upon, constrained, attacked, and at times feel powerless. And notice I said feel, because we often ignore, that feelings are nothing more than a response to a need that's been unmet. So what happens internally to us under these conditions? I'm asking you as a professional, as someone who knows what these things mean. And how does that translate, or how is it translating to the outside into our families, neighborhoods, and communities?
Sure. So with this metro surge, with 4,000, which is supposedly less now, but as people in Minnesota say, we believe it when we see it. The folks that are mostly targeted, who are directly threatened, are experiencing internal those the adrenaline and the cortisol, which is, the heightened survival protection kind of chemistry that we've got in the body, survival hormones. And so experiencing the, basic fight, flight, freeze responses, that messes with your immune system. That sort of heightened danger is real. I'll give you so I mentioned there's a group here, some young Latinas put together a mutual aid piece. They're called Helping Hands, and they deliver, they get donations of like hygiene products, cleaning products. So they're not food, they're other stuff that people need. There are people who have not left their home for 2 months. Their kids, they are afraid to take out their garbage. And I've been doing deliveries on the weekend about 5 to 10 homes all around the metro, and every home I go to has every window covered. There is no sunlight coming in any of those windows. It's total blackout. So that's that metaphor for what's going on internally. Businesses are suffering, some closing. We have some very vibrant, Eat Street, for example, where Alex Preddy was killed, is all immigrant, ethnic restaurants that are very popular. A lot of places closing. People can't go to work, so they can't pay their rent. So there's all kinds of donations about trying to help people with their rent. Schools are pounded, hospitals aren't safe. It's not safe to go to court. So all of that is threatening individuals, families, and then communities are equally thrashed there. The beautiful and hopeful thing, though, in Minnesota is that those who are not directly threatened are showing up. And as they should, and are showing up for their neighbors. There is all kinds of stuff about the value of immigrants, refugees, and asylees that are out. That's graffitied. It's messaged and supporting in all the ways. So I was at a training for it's called Upstander Training for community observers. 80 folks. This was even after it was announced that there'd be fewer agents here, but and it was, primarily white folks, as it should be, being trained in civil disobedience, really, and how do you put your body out there, and there's kind of a menu what people. People who want to do something, it's, well, what do one thing. There are people who are protesting at the Whipple building where they take detainees. There's people who are standing over bridges with a sign. There's just a lovely old man in my neighborhood who stands on his corner with his one sign. People who are donating, people who are working at the legislative level, people who are delivering food, all that kinds of stuff. And people who are out guarding the schools that drop off and pick up. So there's what's being encouraged is, you do you and do it deeply. And so maybe I wandered off of what you asked there, Toufic,
No, it's okay. I'll bring you back a little bit. I
Okay.
think this is very valuable, but I'd just like to go back a little bit to the individual level, right?
Yeah.
So I put down my curtains internally, right?
Right.
I'm dealing with rage. I'm dealing with anger. I'm dealing with fear, obviously. So I put the curtain down. What do I do so I can get out of bed and, both for the person who needs to help, who's not directly threatened, and even more importantly, for the person who is threatened?
Yeah, I think, what I've been impressed with, and again, it's gratefully where I have been fortunate to live, there is a sense of community and building community before this got here. And when they talk here a lot about being in Minnesota and it being so dang cold, and what that has created in terms of people having to look out for one another, so you don't freeze to death, and you can get your car out of the snow, that kind of business. So it's, going back to, it's being in community, and so as a person who is locked in their house, there are people who have reached out to them, and they've reached back to say, and to ask for help. We need toilet paper. Let me bring it to you. I think that the reaching in and reaching out is what will get us all through this. And it is getting us all through this, because if you have the ability to help and you don't, then I don't know that you're going to get through this very well. It is how do you live with yourself then? It's not, and with all humility, and I am not a hero in any sense of this story, but I would not be able to live with myself if I didn't do something to help.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people around the country look at what, at the neighborly support, the rise of the neighbors in the communities that you're describing with some pride and awe, right? With admiration. And often people outside the Twin Cities, maybe outside the state, might want to help and not sure know how. Any thoughts in terms of how you mentioned donations earlier, but
Yeah.
besides that, and besides, keeping you in our thoughts and prayers, let's say,
Yeah.
what can people outside these communities do?
I do think when you reached out to Toufic and others in our IFS community have done that as well. How are you doing there? What can I do? Can I send food? Whatever. And that lifts me up. That tells me, I have people. That's just me. And that those relationships, the time that's spent on those relationships are coming back to support me, to, nurture me. So I think anybody who has that relationship with somebody in Minnesota, that's not a small thing. Um, I think, the thing that would matter, and I've seen this, is be within your own community. I think if people take to heart what's happening in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota, and they do that in their own community, I think that is a great outcome. That's let's spread it. Let's just spread this movement of neighbors showing up for each other.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
I heard it somewhere, maybe from you, Jody, that systems do not have nervous systems, but we people do. What can you tell us really about the current situation when it comes to the intersection of systems of power and people? And in your case, you have systems of power that are local, citywide, you have the state, and then there's the federal. Is there something you can share about what happens at that intersection?
I think so. Without getting all political, I would give the current administration a grade of F for failing. This idea, certainly in the last 3 months, that even United States citizens are being attacked and even murdered by our government, is certainly shocking, and really creates lack of trust, obviously, in that system. And that's the most dramatic stuff lately, but there's been a lot of undermining of trust in this administration, at least in the communities I care about. Maybe other communities, not so much. One of the things that has been impressive to me is, and I heard this at this training I did last weekend, is the word hyper, or phrase, or whatever, hyper local. And that's just really gotten my attention, is the power of people in this sort of hyper local environment, and that this idea that no one's coming to save us, we will save ourselves, is very empowering. I know it shared with you, somebody had said, what were these people thinking? They're invading a northern state in the winter, and many of the residents here are descendants of Vikings, which made me laugh. I mean, there's that sort of humor around, but there is that sort of sense of, you can do these things, but you're not going to conquer us. And that's, that at the local level. Now, at the same time, I would say another mistake in coming after Minnesota is that we're a very civic-minded people. We vote, we pay attention. And so I think at that intersection as well, there will be a reckoning, I believe, politically as well.
Yes, thank you. Hyper local. I think that's a fascinating notion.
Mm-hmm.
It reminds me of, the bottoms up type thing, right?
Yeah.
Leadership happens
Totally.
in that direction, and taking control of our destiny happens in that direction as well.
That's right.
Yeah. So, the complaint of more than half the country is that our communities, some at least, seem to bear the brunt of certain bullying behaviors. How might we stand tall in the face of that without falling into the trap of committing similar behaviors? In other words, how might we model strength in goodness of community and strength of humanistic principles of compassion, respect, and dignity? Because many of us, after all, believe that these principles are not a reflection of weakness or of being wallflowers, but rather steadiness and a true desire to solve otherwise intransigent problems. So how might we do that?
I see it here every day of these last 3 months, just about in all kinds of ways. And the symbol for me are these darn whistles. And so, I've got my whistle here in my purse, and the um and I think, and when Renee Good was killed, her wife said, we came with a whistle, you came with a weapon. And as it all rolls out, the whistles are winning, and I believe. And so it is that, I mean, it does go back to that civil disobedience piece, and the creativity of humans to think about, well, how are we gonna stand up to this? Well, we're going to bring whistles, and you're going to be trained in, if if you see this, you blow your whistle this way. If you see this, you blow your whistle the other way. And so all these people with these darn whistles, and then you hear a whistle and you come out of your house, you go to be a witness. And to me, that's, who ever heard of that? I mean, that's, and it's powerful. It's very powerful. And I know there's been a drawdown supposedly of ICE agents here, and depending on who you talk to, is because it was a big success. But the other thing is Minnesota stood up and stood up to the bully, I think. And so I think that's been a great example. Again, I think, all of the C words, just so many examples of courage, clarity, connection, compassion, that is, what we want to be promoting and what we want to bring to the party. And it's happening.
Mm. Yeah, you mentioned nonviolent civil disobedience, and I just kind of thought of the arc of time turning toward justice.
Yes.
And I have to, in that moment, take really a bow to our brothers and sisters in communities that have been struggling for decades or centuries with a system that has excluded them, not fully acknowledged the dismissiveness and pain it has caused to them, and not repaired in any meaningful way the deep injuries, physical, emotional, moral, spiritual, that system has caused. Right. So what's going on is maybe a variation on an old theme that keeps coming up, right? The anxiety experienced by some of us today has been experienced too long by others. So I'm curious if there's anything we can learn from each other, or perhaps what might we do together to modify these ingrained systems that may not be serving us as a community, generation upon generation.
Right. I think, I've had it pointed out to me, and I've heard to others by, people of color, where they're like, what? You were surprised by this? This has been our reality all along. I, in those moments, I'm aware of my own ignorance, and need to continue to be a learner. In the training that I mentioned that I did this weekend, they took us through a history timeline. It started with, and this is primarily in the Latino community in St. Paul, where our school is located, and starting with Operation Wetback, I think in 1950, and all of the sort of other ugly moments in the United States history around immigrants. And it just reminded me that you have to keep learning. I think, I want to continue to be curious. I want to continue to be open and continue to learn what I haven't learned, or have not been taught. So I think it's continuing. We talk, as therapists a lot about doing our own work. And so that commitment to continue to do my own work, to confront individually and then also as an agency and as a community, all the isms, and continue to work for that kind of equality. I grew up during the Vietnam War, kind of came of age during the Vietnam War, and a lot of my peers, early 20s, late teens, were protesting. I had some peers who protested at the Pentagon, for example, and I remember, and I did not. And mostly I'm kind of crowd averse, so I don't like to go hang out where there's a whole bunch of people. But at the time I thought, well, I'm not doing that, and what does that say? But what I was doing was working with young people that were disaffected from school and justice involved, and that really was my thing, and has continued to be my thing. And I thought of myself at that time, and continue to think of myself as a gardener, and that what my role in this time was to pay attention to these young people, and to pour myself into these young people, and to take care of this garden. And that's kind of been my career metaphor, is that I'm going to take care of this garden right here. And so that's, I think, figuring out, if we're all in this canoe, stick your oar in the water. And so that's where my oar is.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Gardner. I do like this metaphor actually very, very much. You mentioned the 1950s, and I'd just like to extend it way past that, to 400 years of slavery and Jim Crow. And I know there were laws that tried to integrate us and bring us back together as a community and acknowledge the pain and do repair. But that has fallen way too short, I think, because the hearts haven't evolved. And we're seeing it today, right? So I fully understand communities that say, we appreciate your struggle, but for us, there's been no true democracy, right? There's been no true community, that sort of thing. So it's just, I feel I always need to be reminded of that, rather. I need to remember this as I face whatever challenges we have in front of us. So let me go back to respect, dignity, and fairness, if you don't mind, because I'm certain that people today on both sides of this deep chasm can argue that their approach stands by these ideals, that what they're doing is respectful and is dignifying. And so while we remain somewhat pragmatic and stay away from the philosophical, nothing against the philosophical here, how would we define these ideals, in your words, in your opinion? And how can these ideals be the solid basis upon which they should be firmly grounded?
This is where I talk about how you make me think hard. It hurts my brain. And again, I could be out of my element with this, but I just think it's about being human, and that's pretty philosophical, I think. But I just find myself attracted to people and leaders that I think are just being very human, and then kind of repelled by people that I think are not being very human. They're not acting as a human ought to. So it's very basic in my mind. And I think it kind of goes back to, and I'm an educator. So it kind of goes back to, everything we need to know we learned in kindergarten. Kind of a simplicity about, share, don't hit people with your toys. All that kind of business. And that sort of, and I guess I would want for people to ask themselves, what's your framework? What are your ideals? What are your morals? What's your moral compass? And I think that, the sort of basic do unto others stuff is basic for me, not very complicated. Would I want to be treated like that? No. Then I'm going to treat others how I would want to be treated. And so that's just some of the simple things that guide my how I show up in places. Not that I'm perfect and do it correctly all the time. But yeah, I think we're called during these times to say, what do you stand for?
Yes,
What are your ideals?
yes. You said being human is simple. It may be, but it's powerful too. And I would argue that not everybody has learned that in kindergarten. We ought to have learned that in
Right.
kindergarten. Many people, unfortunately, haven't, and maybe
Didn't.
they failed
They need to
kindergarten,
go back to
and
kindergarten.
then you go back and learn again. So, I mean,
Right.
in the IFS parlance, qualities like compassion, patience,
Right.
courage, persistence are inherent in each of us. If
Right.
we loosen the grip of extreme emotions and cultural beliefs that we carry, because
Nice.
we rigidly embrace those things, right? We refer to that state as self-leadership. And leadership from that state of being and believing is open-minded,
Yeah.
yet not flaky or ambivalent,
Yeah.
caring, yet not necessarily naive or a pushover. So how would you advise that we tap into that deep human wisdom and stand up effectively to what we truly consider unjust, unfair, and unacceptable?
Yeah. So I would say first, the phrase "do your own work." I think we're all responsible for ourselves. I am so grateful during these times to have had the IFS training and experiences that I have had over the last couple decades because it gives me a framework to sort myself out. And so it's that sort of self-understanding that engaging in a relationship with myself, where I can be my own cheerleader, my own comforter, my own teacher, is so beneficial to again, how I show up in relationship with people I care about and communities I care about. So first, do your own work, and I feel like I've had that framework to be able to do that and continue to do that. Second, be in community, because this multiplies our impact and it gives us sustenance to carry on. We can't do this work by ourselves. There's no one person that can do this work alone. And I think that multiplying factor and that being able to sustain over time the kind of work that needs to be done to protect vulnerable folks and protect our communities and not just even survive but thrive is done in community. And then third, that kind of goes back to that framework is what's your mantra? What's your theme? What's your byline? And in Minnesota, Paul Wellstone was a very revered uh, legislator, human, died in a plane crash with his wife and daughter. And he said, "We do better when we all do better." And that's often quoted here in Minnesota, and I believe that and take that to heart. And so that kind of gives me that direction.
We do better when we all do better. Yes. And yet, probably some people don't see that, don't appreciate it, don't embrace it. I mean, we live in a time when we are completely polarized, right? I mean, there are maybe two halves, maybe not exactly half, maybe 60-40, but let's think of them as two halves of a country, right? And there's been social progress, yet for some people, that was not progress, that was regression. Um, so we stand in this turmoil confused, almost like having lived in along two different journeys, two different paths, right? Almost facing two different systems of truth. So how do we navigate? I know this is a big question for all of us, but I'm curious about, your own views on this, Jody. How would we navigate this polarization of views, beliefs, observations, interpretations? At times, these differences are irreconcilable. What do
Yeah.
you suggest for us?
Well, I think, I will say I live in a bubble. I am in Minneapolis, St. Paul, where I live and work. We have we're a blue city. We're kind of a purple state. Our Governor Walz and our mayors and our Attorney General are people who I look up to, and I believe what they say. And, we are on the same team, right? So I don't often interact with people who are polarized in their thinking to me. Now I can travel in outstate Minnesota and run across those communities. And have traveled for conferences or what have you, and just by lawn signs, I realize, okay, I'm someplace else now. But honestly, I have not engaged deeply in conversations with those folks. I do think that and I read some people, David Brooks and others that are more conservative than me, but who are seeing that there's a kind of a reckoning happening. I think, there's examples what we're living with here in Minnesota, but the Epstein files and all of that business and all that, is that, and I think just the awareness about the elite wealthy class and coming into a realization of how people live differently, has really cracked open the myth that we're this great country, a shining light on the hill. I see hope in that, of that being to get real about what this country is about. And I think that it's that clarity and looking without the, shiny glasses on or what have you, to say, what is it really? What is the experience really like for people? To me, that gives me some hope that, that if we can listen and be in conversation with one another, that we can hold on to some diverse perspectives without blowing ourselves up.
Yeah. Kind of to take it further, you mentioned earlier about our natural response to danger, right? We panic or we become overly vigilant and forceful. Is there another way to notice that, which is an indicator of danger, but then deal with things with greater steadiness, maturity, level-headedness? What would you recommend that's practical for folks who are facing these emotions? You kind of touched upon it earlier, but I'd like to kind of bring it back up and do almost like a recap of that question.
Yeah. I had said, I go back to simple things, your kindergarten, and now I'm going to bring up Mr. Rogers, who says, look for the helpers. And so that's what we're doing here. We're looking for the helpers, and then we are looking to be the helpers. And what could we just all be like Mr. Rogers? I mean, that's who's your model? Who are you taking in? I think, again, here in Minnesota, watching people who are carrying, like the leadership, carrying a lot of burden, and doing it bravely and courageously. And so how to support that. And kind of going back to the darn whistles again, get a whistle, grab your whistle, and be a witness, and for yourself and for others. Again, I speak of this training I was in last week, in the upstander training, and the trainer, who is a Latino man, from Ecuador, said, what they don't know is that we're like fish. We're fish under the water. They can't see us because we're fish in the water. And so be the fish. And then I was also thinking, or be the water. Water beats rock. And I don't know. Those are just things I've been thinking about this weekend, is, okay, am I being a fish now, or am I the water? And it helps me to show up when I'm just one small person.
Well, you're one small person that can have a ripple across the water that you just referred to. So water travels, right? Information travels through water very, very forcefully. Yeah. You mentioned Mr. Rogers and you chuckled, and I, remembered I wanted to spend a moment at least talking about playfulness and humor. You kind of touched upon it earlier, but I want to give you a chance to kind of tell us how playfulness and humor can take a role
Totally.
in this difficult time.
So when the St. Paul Public Schools asked me to do a thing on humor, I did what people my age do. I went and got a book on the subject and read it, the actual book, two books actually. So I read two books about humor, and they were
You
in a
can write books on humor, Jody. Come on.
that's my next thing. Um, and not surprisingly, one book was like serious about humor, was how important fun and funny and this sort of humor mindset. It's about intentionality and how important that is for our well-being. And we talked earlier about the kind of adrenaline and cortisol hormones that try to protect us. And then there's also the happy juice like serotonin and dopamine that give you those good feelings of I'm cared for and I'm doing okay and we'll all be okay and we're in relationship and all that kind of stuff. So how do you want to get that to be resilient during this thing? You want to get those fired up. One of the things I've always been impressed with in dark times is how funny the comedians are. I don't know if other people experience that, but just, oh my God, I think comedy gets just like wicked funny during dark times. They're funny. So I've asked people in groups I've been in. So how many times have you watched the video of ICE agents falling on their ass on the ice? And everyone raises their hand and they watch it repeatedly. So it is that sort of dopamine hit to, in Minnesota in 20 below zero weather, people are funny and need that. One of the books said it's not so much about getting a laugh as it is giving a laugh. And so that intentionality of and not fall down laughter, but like a giggle, like a smile. Um, I was walking yesterday past a neighbor and it got up to 20 degrees or something. I don't know. And I said, "Oh man, heat wave." And he laughed. I mean, it's not a big deal, just a little what my mom would call smart mouth. So looking for ways to give a laugh. Um, and if you haven't watched Goats in Pajamas, Baby Goats in Pajamas, that helps too.
And I just wanted to tell our international listeners that you meant 20 degrees Fahrenheit, which is way below zero
Oh yeah.
Celsius. Yes.
Yeah, very good.
So there comes a point when the lingering discomfort and suffering are so profound that we say enough is enough. Many may be there already.
Yeah.
What might we say or do to calm the field rather than inflame it without invalidating what folks are experiencing? In other words, as we close, I'd like you to tell us, what would a wise adult say at this point in time?
I don't know that I'm a wise adult, but
Try to be, at least
I
for
am
the
an
next few
adult.
moments.
I have found myself telling people, and younger people at work, particularly as I think about it, that it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to not be okay. And I think, particularly when you're talking about helpers, teachers, therapists, folks that feel like they've got to have their poop together all the time, is like, it is okay to not be okay. I think people need to hear that. I did read a Buddhist piece the other day that said pain is to be expected, suffering is optional.
Mm.
And so I think living with that kind of idea about this is painful. But I don't have to sit in my suffering about it. I can let this pass through. Um, we do some hold the holder sessions, which I think have been really well received, of just being able to create space for people to be whatever they need to be. and you don't even need to come to it, but this is offered, that sort of safe space to be wherever you are. I think I'm impressed with the both andness of things. Like, yes, we don't, it's a long game. Uh, don't blow up because that's what they're expecting you to do. And so be strategic, think long, take the long view. But I think at the same time, and you might have said something earlier about this, Toufic, but and then speak truth to power. I mean, that's, if that's your, the space that you're in, absolutely, respect that. So, yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Jody. Before I just share a short closing statement, I wanted to honor you and honor the residents of Minneapolis and St. Paul and those in the state of Minnesota who really put their lives on the line and who really showed us what it looks, from my vantage point, like to be human, to really care for our neighbors, for our fellow human beings, regardless of the political construct and conditions and labels that people assign. And laws are important, but there's something stronger than laws and more fundamental, which I call ethics, right?
Nice.
Integrity of the spirit. So thank you for that. So, just for my listeners, I'd like to say that as we close, I'm again struck by how hard it is to stay human. Right? I mean, we're talking about it the whole episode, and it's not easy to stay human the way we're looking at the ideals of being human. Yet every experience I've had tells me we must remain human. In times like these, sustaining community is not about grand gesture or performative behavior. It's rather about everyday choices, whether we listen and how we speak to one another and about one another, how we manifest moral courage and stay true to humanistic values, how we honor each other's dignity, how we show tolerance and understanding. To me, these are very important, Jody and dear listener. These define us. At the end of the day, even if it's a cliche, if we remember that we are all together in this, like you said earlier, we may realize we need to commit to a collective solution.
Right.
None of this means we look the other way and keep silent. And I invite us all to stand up for goodness with goodness, stand up for injustice justly, and model the beliefs and values we carry in our words, decisions, and actions, and we show up in the face of adversity non-violently with moral courage.
Right.
Above all, let's hold on to hope. And speaking of hope, Jody, what gives you hope and resilience at this moment?
That's great. I would say being in community, pretty crazy about community. Watching brave neighbors gives me hope. Just, dorky, normal people in funny hats, putting themselves out there. Mutual aid. I'd never even heard that phrase before, and now it's everywhere about mutual aid. And isn't that a great 2 words? Mutual aid. Paying attention to that. And then what I would say is young people, we've had many different schools here in the metro and other areas where kids have organized walkouts and their own protests for things. And that gives me a lot of hope to see young people showing that kind of bravery.
Thank you, Jody, and thank you, listeners. Until next time.
Thanks, Toufic. Good to be with you.
Thanks for listening. Facing the Moment is an independent production of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, a nonprofit committed to bringing emotional, relational, and societal healing and well-being to a world in need. Learn more at foundationifs.org. You can download this and all other episodes on Apple Music, Spotify, and YouTube. Until the next episode, may we all keep facing the moment with grit and grace.